much for joining us today. We're with Andrew McBean, partner at Grant Thornton. Andrew, thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can start with a little bit more about you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and about the role of Grant Thornton in Thailand?
I am a partner here at Grant Thornton. I've been here in Thailand for 11 years actually. Within Grant Thornton I look after business development, marketing and outsourcing. Grant Thornton we have 170 staff here in Thailand, and we look after areas like audit, tax, executive recruitment, corporate finance, business risk services, management consulting, and of course outsourcing as well.
So we understand that recently you gave a talk about ASEAN and the AEC. Who was the talk for?
The talk was it was an update actually. It was really to bring everybody up to speed on, as 2015 is happening pretty soon, 6 months away, what is really now happening on the AEC. I think about a year ago or a year, 18 months ago, there was a sort of a flurry of seminars on what it was. And in fact, at that time, I had done a talk called AEC Hype or Reality, just kind of saying, is it going to be hype, is it going to be reality? And at that time, I was very optimistic with what was going to happen with AEC. And I was actually joined in this presentation by Cynthia, a partner from Tillich & Gibbons, who did a presentation. She was very pessimistic a year ago. This time we did another presentation together, and interestingly, I was more pessimistic and she was more optimistic. And I think perhaps we've come together in the middle in a much more sort of practical assessment to bring everybody up to speed on exactly what's happening with the AEC today.
So who was the talk for then?
American Chamber of Commerce and British Chamber of Commerce members. They came.
So if we just take this back a little bit and perhaps go through some of the more technical explanation for viewers who might not be familiar with these terms. So when we say ASEAN, what do we actually mean? What are we talking about?
ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, so that's what it stands for, and it's 10 countries, would include Brunei. Perhaps some people might forget that Brunei is there. It's a small country, it's with a lot of oil though, so it's wealthy. And also countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and of course the big guys like Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia. So 10 countries in all are in ASEAN.
Okay, and so when we say AEC, what do we mean when we talk about that?
It's really, in a way, synonymous, really. It's sort of a means to an end. The ASEAN Secretariat, the ASEAN group, have got 3 frameworks which are in operation and long-term sort of strategies, if you like. One of them is economic, which is the AEC, the ASEAN Economic Community. That's one of them. There are 2 others, though, which are running actually in parallel and are somewhat related. One is about political and security, and the other one is about cultural integration between all the ASEAN nations as well. So there's actually these 3 parallel giant strategies operating within ASEAN, and one of them is the AEC.
So the AEC and ASEAN, they're 2 different concepts or 2 similar concepts?
I would say it's a means to an end. ASEAN is the 10 countries, and the AEC is trying to foster basically the ASEAN to become one marketplace. Effectively, you can think of it like that. So that it's sort of Europe, if you like, except maybe without some of the problematic elements. But it has its own challenges, as we'll discuss in a second. So you would have free movement of labor. If you're a citizen of ASEAN, you can move around boundaries. You wouldn't need your passport even. You could work in other countries. You would be able to own a majority ownership of any business if you're an ASEAN citizen. You can have a free flow of goods around there. The tariff barriers are all dropped. So really treating ASEAN as one economic community. And the AEC is a sort of attempting to be a blueprint for how to achieve that. It was originally going to be 2020, but in 2007 they decided to bring that forward to 2015. Probably that sounded like a good idea in 2007. Maybe now it's not such a good idea. Maybe people want to push it back to 2020. But originally it was a 2020 vision, and it was brought forward to being accomplished in 2015, and had many sort of, if you like, hoops that countries would go through in order to get to this entirely open system.
So we can compare the concept then with something like the EU?
in some ways, in terms of the desire, in terms of the vision, I suppose we have to bear in mind as well that Europe, how long has Europe been going for? And still is definitely not a perfect environment. But it does have that idea. I suppose what it doesn't have from a European perspective, it doesn't have a parliament, it doesn't have a court, it doesn't have 40,000 staff. In fact, it only has 40 staff.
Wow, really?
Yeah, there's only 40 staff driving the AEC, for example, within the ASEAN Secretariat, which is based in Jakarta in Indonesia. It doesn't have a single currency. And maybe that's not a bad thing, especially given that the economies of ASEAN, which are being joined together, are in very different stages of development. I think that's particularly an issue. When the European Union was formed, it was formed somewhat with like countries, similar sort of economic prowess and so on. That's not the case with ASEAN. They're in very different stages of development. But you still have the same intentions in terms of people transiting, barriers dropped, including tariff and non-tariff barriers dropped, majority ownership, ASEAN citizens, if you like, and treating ASEAN as a single market.
Okay. So you mentioned the 10 countries that are involved, but you didn't mention China.
No.
Are they involved, not involved?
They're very involved,
Okay.
but they're not in ASEAN per se. They're not one of the 10 countries, obviously, but definitely they're one of the 3 elephants in the kitchen, the economic kitchen. Not just the economic kitchen, actually. So I think there's a tremendously strong cultural influence from China within ASEAN, with many countries in ASEAN, and a lot of links. Of course, clearly China sees this as an area where it can really boost trade. And sees the area itself being, I think, quite politically useful as well, in its own backyard, if you like. Whereas America is very far away, but is also seeing that too, and is now posturing kind of back in here. And Japan is, somewhat, I suppose, equidistant, but is also very strong and is also posturing as well. Japan economic clout is very, very high. For example, in Thailand and Indonesia, starting to rise a lot within Myanmar, for example, as well. So these 3 are the elephants in the kitchen. You've got the 10, but then you've got the 3 other countries that are posturing, also working in their own trade side, either with ASEAN or bilateral agreements as well. South Korea is considered to be one of the ASEAN plus 3. Actually, South Korea, Japan, China is one of the ASEAN plus 3. The way that the US is trying to posture is through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. Although that would also include some other countries like South American countries as well.
Oh, okay. So the 10 core countries then, so to speak, practically speaking, how do they actually work together as an economic community?
I think, first of all, to sort of dazzle everybody with a bit of potential, today, if ASEAN was one marketplace, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world.
Wow.
So significant. And by 2030, even more impressive, it would be the 4th largest economy in the world. It would have 300 million new middle-class members by 2030. 2030 is not that far away, actually. I mean, it's, 15, 16 years away. So it's got absolutely tremendous attraction. If you look at the BRIC countries today, Brazil, Russia, India, China, actually if you were to introduce ASEAN into BRIC, we would be the 2nd largest economy behind China. So today. So, the potential of linking all this together, of treating ASEAN as one, is, I think, very, very high. The reality is quite different. The reality is, first of all, 80% of ASEAN trade is extra-ASEAN. It's not intra-ASEAN. And of course, a large part of what the AEC tries to achieve is actually intra-ASEAN trade. But in fact, 80% of existing trade is extra-ASEAN, is going outside ASEAN. So that's a challenge. Second, and probably the most fundamental, is that every single country is going through its own individual challenges, its individual turmoil, its individual opportunities, and it makes it extremely hard for, even 2 countries to agree on things, let alone 10 countries to agree on things, when every one of them is going through its own sort of degrees of turbulence. And there's a certain amount of nationalism within every country as well, and a lot of protectionism It's very hard when each country, if countries are going through their own turmoil, for them to be able to see the advantages of working with others. There tends to be this kind of inward focus. We see that from Europe as well. So nationalism has crept in Europe after tough economic times. So it's sort of no different in ASEAN, but less developed even. So the idea of trying to do some of what the AEC painted in that environment becomes much, much harder. And there is absolutely no organs that make it happen. There's no issue if you don't achieve something other than perhaps a little bit of embarrassment. There's no other way that you will suffer as a result of not hitting certain milestones.
Okay. Moving on slightly, we have a lot of small and medium enterprises as clients. How can they look to sort of maximise their potential to this concept?
I think there's two important sort of ways to look at this. One is to remember that what ASEAN is trying to do really mostly is to benefit ASEAN citizens. I think that's something we have to bear in mind uppermost, is that if you're an ASEAN citizen, you get to have a majority ownership of another business in ASEAN. Not if you're a foreigner like me or like your good self. It doesn't mean to say, in terms of that part of the dream, it doesn't really benefit us at all. It's for ASEAN benefit. But there's downstream benefit for businesses who are here. For example, if you're here, you can take advantage of the fact that a lot of tariff barriers are already reduced. You could maybe take advantage later, when there is potentially I wouldn't say free flow of labour, freer flow of labour, I think we have to say that. You may be able to take advantage of that better than you could today, for example. So there are downstream benefits to foreign businesses who are from outside ASEAN, but there are supposed to be much more tangible business benefits to businesses which are owned by ASEAN citizens.
Okay. So I guess by way of summary then, it sounds like there's a lot of things coming up. So very briefly, what are the key things that we should be looking out for moving forward?
Well, the reason I kind of moved into a center ground from being very optimistic is that I now kind of feel that ASEAN is being driven by just pragmatic optimism about the region, which is well-founded. Every country is going through some pretty good GDP growth. Even Thailand will return to that as well. So therefore, the region as a whole is going through great economic growth. We've got all these great statistics, like number 4 economy in the world, if it was one block in 2030, a huge middle class, more money being spent, education systems are changing, infrastructure is being developed. I mean, there's great potential here. And we're sitting in the center of Asia, which is also growing as well. So, wow, I mean, tremendous reason to be optimistic. However, I think the all of this is therefore being driven just by pragmatic business optimism, not really by the AEC. I think it's useful that the AEC is a document that people can wave around. Indonesia is the largest economy in ASEAN. Thailand's the second largest. And both of those countries are fairly ambivalent about the AEC. They talk about, well, certainly actually within Thailand it's talked about, but there's not really too much action going on. In Indonesia it's not even talked about mostly. And that's where the ASEAN Secretariat are. So I think with that background is to sort of not hold your breath for the AEC, but pragmatically to understand the tariff barriers which are already reduced, because that's the case between the big economies, and in 2018 the smaller economies will also drop their trade barriers too. Tariff barriers, that's very important. So those are good to understand because they do have a practical benefit today. And the other thing is just to understand what free trade agreements are already in place, either bilaterally or multilaterally. Nothing is going to suddenly happen with the AEC being a multilateral trade agreement. That's not the case. Bilateral agreements are much more likely to arrive before this multilateral agreement. So I think those are just pragmatic things that businesses can do. And of course, keep tuning in every year or something like that. Increasing a knowledge of ASEAN itself is a good thing. 620 million people in ASEAN, nearly half are Muslim. in another 20 years, more than half will be Muslim. And I think that's worth bearing in mind. We need to know more about our own backyard as well. I think each member probably looks very much at its own country. There's a certain parochialism within Thailand, for example, and I think that needs to change. We need to, even in the education system and so on, start getting, and I understand this is starting to happen in certain places, a kind of an ASEAN awareness beginning. And that's very important, I think.
So lots to look forward to, but as you say, we still need to remain, conscious of the pragmatics as well. But in particular, what are the challenges that we're going to face?
The challenges are really that each country has its own issues. That's actually probably principally, and I see a tremendous amount of nationalism in a lot of countries. Probably the only one that says, come and get me is Singapore. Because they're incredibly open already. You have tremendous openness there, whereas in most other countries there's a lot of protectionism, and it's therefore the non-tariff barriers, which haven't even been identified yet, which are going to be the biggest problem, I think. And the fact that they haven't even been identified yet, and I'm sure there are a zillion of them, I think that's really going to be extremely challenging. It's good, I suppose, that countries will do what's easy. And to some degree they already have. And as I said, it's good that they're doing that through just pragmatic understanding of the benefits of ASEAN as a whole. But in reality, these national interests will dominate. And it's just hard to see that changing anytime soon.
So that's really interesting, and that was a very helpful explanation. Thank you. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our viewers with?
No, I don't want to, I suppose just to, as I said, it's a practical observation now, is that I do see ASEAN as absolutely a fantastic place to be. And anybody who's here is in a good spot, I think. But the AEC is not really what's going to drive the agenda, I think. I think it's the pragmatic, view of what our potential is in ASEAN, which is really going to drive the agenda.
Okay. Thank you very much for having us today.
Pleasure.
And for giving us that explanation.
Thank you.
Thank you.